This show and all the content on All About Beer is able to come to you each week, thanks to the companies that support our journalism through advertising. If your company is thinking about 2023 media plans, we have options for every budget. Email info@allaboutbeer.com to learn more. And thanks for the support in keeping us on air and online. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. Gretchen Langfeldt of Switchback Brewing is here this week, talking about flagship ales, historic equipment, employee ownership, and Rauchbier. We're going to get into it all in a moment, but first, a reminder that All About Beer is back online, and it's producing original content for beer enthusiasts and professionals. You can go visit allaboutbeer.com to see the latest. And if you want to support us in that endeavor, we've set up a Patreon for both readers and professional companies in the beer space. Go check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer to learn more. For additional audio content, search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice, and you can listen to the shows that are now available. And if you're a fan of smoked beer, well, I hope you are, but if you're not, you will be after this episode. So go check out This Week in Rauchbier. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's at TW Rauchbier. We're able to bring you the show each week thanks to the companies that support independent journalism in the beer space. You can learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates simply by emailing info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by Pro Brewer. We bring original articles to probrewer.com twice a week, covering issues important to the beer industry and aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand different facets of the business. You can check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and Thursday. You can visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. Over the summer, I spent a delightful evening at Switchback, the venerable Vermont brewery. And there, I got to talking with Gretchen Langfeldt over beers and during a tour of the brewery. And at the time, I was really bummed that I didn't have my mobile recording kit with me. But now, here we are, and she's here this week via Zoom for the show, and I could not be happier. After graduating Notre Dame with an engineering degree, she started working at Switchback one day a week, and then eventually full-time. Today, she's the engineer and brand marketing leader for the brewery. And we're going to talk about engineering and marketing, plus beer and employee ownership. And yes, true believers, we will eventually get into Rauchbier. But I started off by asking about the physical building and the equipment inside. As you'll hear, it's truly a special place worth many visits. Here's our conversation. Having visited the brewery several times, including over the summer when we had a lot of fun, I've always been struck by the sort of, I was going to say slapdash, but that's not fair. But it's kind of like a Frankenstein brewery. Is that fair? Frankenstein's Monsters Brewery, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we put a lot of focus on getting the right equipment to do, the get the precision and consistency we want. And sometimes that means, some older equipment that's not quite as shiny and as pretty when it was made back in the 60s or the 90s. But the level of, technical bells and whistles that they have is more than we could have probably gotten at that time of the brewery's history, financially. So it's, we haven't just gone all in on one manufacturer or anything. So there is a little bit of a hybrid look as far as manufacturers and age of some of the equipment.
Yeah, but an engineering background, I imagine, has come into play with figuring out how to not only match different manufacturers, but also different decades of equipment.
Yeah, definitely have learned a lot from whether it's, German electrical schematics versus American electrical, and just how, I'm certainly not a controls or programming engineer, but I've gotten further into that over the years, and just the way, older equipment was actually simpler in a lot of ways. And that's sort of the beauty of it, is you don't get hung up on some of these newfangled sensors, that want to watch every little door that opens. So it really challenged me. It still really challenges me to figure out every different piece of equipment. And truthfully, day in and day out now, I'm not out on the production floor very much. So I deal mostly with the installs, procuring equipment, get it started up, and then I really hand it over to our production team. So, they truthfully know a lot more about our newer equipment than I do.
Well, when you are thinking about procuring new equipment, though, for the brewery, are you thinking about how it will fit into the jigsaw puzzle that is the existing brewery?
Yeah, both physically, I give Bill a lot of credit, don't tell him that, but he very early
he doesn't
on,
listen to this show. That's
I know.
fine.
He doesn't know what a podcast is. But, very early on, even, we only had a small portion of this building initially. We've brewed here since day one, but we were a pretty small section of the building that was actually our space. And even from then, he had kind of, I think, a rough idea of, okay, long term, this is where a bigger boiler would go, or this is where a bigger brew house would go. So my kind of first introduction to that was when we started planning for our 66 barrel brew house and the fermentation cellar, which we didn't even start for, I think, a year or two after we put that brew house in. But when we did that, he was like, put in or plan for all of the glycol drops for every single tank that can ever get in here. So we have over the years never had to, shut down our loop and put in a new drop, because I know this is getting a little wonky technical.
No, but I mean, to have the foresight for that and also the means and the ability to is
exactly
huge.
Yeah, you put some money out front and certainly some effort, but it's made, just dropping in a new tank so easy. And there's still a lot that goes into that process, but it doesn't disrupt everything. And there are certainly things we've done where we've been like, yeah, no, that's not what we ended up doing, but it would have cost us a lot more to not do some things. So the pre-planning, but not getting so cemented into something that you can't pivot as technology changes and as market demand changes.
Yeah,
we went from kegging to bottling and now to canning, and we're doing all through it three, and I love that.
I imagine that there are some shops and distributors though that are frustrated by having all three.
Yeah. I mean, we are, I think, probably one of the last breweries standing that is continuing to do 22-ounce bombers that are actually selling. I'm sure there are others out there, but for that to have, it's been 10 years now, and my understanding is we're pretty much the only one that still consistently pulls through. The issue being that shelves are literally they no longer size the height of the shelves for a bomber. So
yeah,
unfortunately that may disappear.
Do you have any insight as to who's interested in picking up bombers these days?
Just from watching it in the tap room, I think it's the folks who've been buying the bombers for 10 years. I think that's how they drink Switchback. That's how they want to enjoy it. I don't think it's as much of the, in my mind, and this is a little silly, but it kind of used to be the sampling, size, which sounds crazy because it's so big, but it was like a sharing sample. You'd bring it to your beer share, or and I think now with being able to single grab cans or just having bars that, have 24 taps on, the bottle shops of the world aren't necessarily bottle shops anymore. They're can shops. And yeah, the 22s have, they'll have their heyday. They'll come back. Everything's cyclical, right?
Wait, do you really believe that? Because I don't know if I've ever heard anybody else in brewing in the last 5 years say that.
Yeah, no, I don't think 22s are going to come back. I was being a little sarcastic there. I mean, if anything,
I think there's people who would like to see it come back, but
yeah. And a lot of times I think some of that's driven by the material manufacturers. Are the glass manufacturers going to keep making 22s?
Yeah. But also, I mean, you guys do stubby bottles as well. I don't know the technical term for that particular shape of bottle, but it's a little taller than a red stripe, I guess.
Yeah, ours is
a little more defined.
It's a slightly different shape than the red stripe. And then I think, I believe Coors also has a stubby that they do Coors Banquet in sometimes.
Okay. That's
so
probably
the more,
I don't even know if red stripe is still being made. So I'm dating myself.
It's kind of vacation beer,
Yeah.
Our stubby is, we do not own the mold, but we are one of the few breweries that we know of that does use that specific mold. So it's a pretty, our understanding was that we were the biggest buyer of that bottle. So I think it has become a little bit, for most people tied to Switchback Ale or Switchback in general. And we love it. It's just kind of fun to hold, fun to drink out of. Then you get all those extra perks of it's a little bit lighter. Weight wise, so shipping's not as much, and you can get more on a pallet because of the height. So you kind of all those advantages that people like about cans, and it's got some of those as well.
Yeah, there's something interesting about, and I've talked about this on the show of going back to bottles now and again, and sort of the throwback nature, or the I think somebody even on the show described it as like the romanticism of beer a little bit. Of it's harder with a stubby, but just holding a beer by the neck of the bottle, or just the different texture. Sort of in the similar vein of the 22s. Do you have an understanding of like when it comes to like Switchback, when it comes to like Switchback Ale? Are there people who still prefer bottles over cans, or is it just people are grabbing whatever's available at the time?
I think there are definitely people who prefer one or the other. But I think most folks have gotten over the initial, I'm a bottle person or I'm a can person. I think the variety of ways, you can experience a drinking Switchback is sort of what, it's the ale for all occasions. That if you want it in the can, if you want it in the bomber, if you want the 16 ounce, if you want it draft, if you want it stubby, it's perfect for whatever, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But that diehard of like, I only drink out of glass, or I only bring cans, I think is less than it was, when people were hardcore one way or the other.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, for the foreseeable future though, the 12 ounce bottles aren't going anywhere?
No, we're still, people are still enjoying drinking out of them and buying them. We did just actually install and did our first run, about to do our second on a can labeler, because part of the difficulty with cans is having to order truckloads of pre-printed, and that really limits what beers you can put in those cans. You don't need 100 barrels of everything you ever make. So we are actively changing over that. Actually, our little sneak peek, our Dooley's belated porter is going to be officially debuted in 16 ounce cans, I think end of next week, the week after. So, you gotta go where the market is a little bit. And also just keeping things fresh. That Dooley's been around for a while, and let's give it a little new look and a new way for people to enjoy it.
I mean, there are beers that you all make, and I loved being there over the summer because I was mostly drinking Rauchbier, but there's something that is and has always been reliable about Switchback when it comes to, these are the beers that I remember cutting my teeth on when I first got into locally made beer, when I got into craft or micro, or whatever we were calling it at the time. And I think there are brewers that have only stayed in the past, and Switchback is not one of them, but you all continue to make the styles that the industry was built on. There's like the porter, like the brown. I mean, there's just still a pretty simple pale ale, if I'm remembering correctly. You guys even do a red ale, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, a roasted red ale. Yep.
Yeah. But then also, you're doing hazies, and you're doing, the lagers that folks are looking for these days. Giving the porter a refresh in a 16 ounce can, is that a chance to introduce a style that some might see as stodgy to a new generation?
Yeah, I think the introducing it to new people is definitely where what we're trying to do, because yeah, you see what your parents drink or something, and you may not gravitate towards that. There's that nostalgia factor, but at some point you also want to try something new for yourself. And just, those categories or those styles you talked about, those are what brewing was built on. And just because, excuse me, we're, zany things are coming out doesn't mean those aren't still quality beers and styles to go with. So, we certainly have made some stuff that will periodically bring back out, but don't get an every year release. Whereas with Dooley's Porter and Roasted Red and Extra Pale Ale, those, and Slow Fermented Brown, those have quite the following for us. And, we get yelled at when we don't put them out when people expect it. So as you pointed out, we are doing a lot of new stuff too, but we think there's room for all of that, especially with our tap room now being able to sell more direct to consumer out of here. And having the distributors see that where we are more than ale, and there's things that can really complement ale from a family perspective.
Can you go a little bit deeper on that, on how those relationships work with finding the complementary sales?
Yeah, I hope we've built a really solid name and reliability for people. They get a Switchback ale and they're really happy. But like anyone, I want to drink a different beer every now and then too. And especially when there's a billion beers out there, you start gravitating towards the things you trust and and we've seen that a lot with people just commenting, or when we do release something new, they go, "Oh yeah, you make good stuff. I'll give this a shot." And that's a little self-congratulatory, but I think, we've over 20 years have proven that ale, ale is always going to be there, and it's always going to be consistent. It's always going to taste great. So we do that with all of our beers too. And even if they're not available year round.
So can we talk about Switchback Ale a little bit? And I like that you're just calling it ale.
I'm trying to train myself not to do that. Actually,
no. But that's a very Vermont thing. It's almost like being in Pennsylvania, where people order lager and expect to get a Yuengling in return. I like that it's just been reduced to the style, or the broader category. What is Switchback Ale? Can it be defined?
Yeah, I can't. I think maybe somewhere in his head, Bill has a couple different. You said you're the
marketing lead.
I know that's a bit of an issue, right? It's. I think it's one of those beers that you never get tired of, and not because it's so wild. It's almost that it's so subtle in its complexity. I think that you drink it, and some days, you get this note, and some days you taste something else, and it doesn't overwhelm, but it also doesn't, disappear. So, there are some beers you drink and you kind of forgot you drank it from a taste perspective. I don't get that ever with ale. You drink it, you enjoy, like during the summer, sometimes you get some of those kind of fruity notes from the yeast, and during the winter, I think it's a little maltier for me. It's not necessarily the beers changing. I think just seasonally, what you're feeling and what you're eating with it, any of those things can affect what you're getting out of it. So it, complex but not overwhelming is my sort of 2-word, not very marketing savvy description of it.
Well, I also wonder though, if you all tried to put it into a better defined box, if drinkers' relationship with it would change.
Mm-hmm.
There's been conversations online, even on the show. We were talking when I was out in Portland a couple of weeks ago, talking about amber ales and how, people say that they love amber ales and then nobody buys amber ales, and brewers are hesitant to make them. If you all were to, better define this just for market's sake, could it wind up damaging the beer.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is if you tell people what they're supposed to be experiencing, then they start drawing a line, whether they're whichever side of the line they're on. And I think leaving it a little more open-ended can allow people to sort of come up with their own feelings for it. And a lot of times, I talk a lot about the flavor and taste of it, but it's what you were doing. It's who you were with. I know that sounds kind of hokey, but if you were going to UVM up here in a certain era, that was the beer you drank when you're out at bars when you turned 21. If you were a little older and that was the beer that your friends had at their wedding, like it's those kind of nostalgic things, but you don't only want to live in the past. So I think also having it just be day in and day out, this anomaly a little bit, that we're not telling you it's an amber, we're not telling you it's a wheat, because it's not. Menus, it's hilarious. Some menus, I'll go to, you go to 5 different restaurants and you get 5 different like one word descriptions of what it is, and I'm like, restaurants can't even figure it out.
That's fun though.
Yeah,
and
it's choose your own adventure.
Yeah, but see, and that's sort of those early days of craft as well, of the exploration and the fun behind it. And is that, you're mentioning, certain eras of, when folks were in school or weddings or things like that. So many of the new to craft drinkers are largely exposed to hazy IPA, or kettle sours, or big boozy imperial pastry stouts, like that kind of thing. Is this still a gateway beer for new drinkers in Vermont, as best you can tell?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. We've always joked that and I certainly do not condone littering, but we've always joked that the true test of whether your beer is being consumed and is seeing the empties on the side of the road. And it's funny, you're like, oh wow, out after a college party, you see a bunch of empty, switchback cans, and maybe not, strewn everywhere, hopefully, but one here or there when people are walking to the bar, and you're like, all right, it's still working.
So a lot of cans on the side of the road, not as many bombers.
No. I mean, it's one, and I was charging my car recently at like a public charger, and I plugged in and I looked behind it, and there was an empty 16-ounce of ale, and I had one of the moments where I was like, oh, and then went, oh, actually, that's great. So I picked it up,
right,
recycled
good.
it, but
good.
And it was not me, for the record.
I was gonna say, it's like, oh, it's still there from the last time I charged the car. Yeah. That's fun though. And in being that gateway, because I think that this is what a lot of brewers around the country are struggling with when it comes to flagships, or, beers that they want to be known for, but are sort of golden handcuffed into, well, let's make what just the market demands kind of thing. When you all got into, making, the hazies, right? And is that the Cat series?
Yeah, our double IPA Cat series.
Yeah. When you all started doing that, was there I guess, what was the thought behind it? Was it, this is where the market is going and we need to as well? Was it brewery passion? Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, it came from, I think, brewer passion. Morgan, she's our kind of pilot innovation brewer. She and Bill and Tony, our head brewer, I think we're just shooting around some ideas one day. And I think it came a little bit out of her just challenging herself, saying, I want to figure out how to make a double IPA that doesn't make me feel horrible afterwards, but also to do something kind of original. And she was just playing with it. And then we were kind of like, oh, wait a minute, this is fun, and I think initially, truthfully, I was actually on vacation when all this came about, and I came back and Bill goes, okay, just bear with me. And he was like, here's what we're naming it. Here's what we're thinking. And I was like, whatever, let's try it, And as soon as we had it, we found ourselves, we were all like, ooh, I want to try that. I want to try this. And we sort of discovered we all had this sort of underlying interest in playing around with these things, and going, we can do this too, just because we don't historically do it, or, other people are doing it, doesn't mean we can't do our own twists on it. And I think we really have with, being really hop and fruit forward and less bitter forward. So, in the alcohol, to me, frighteningly enough, you don't really taste that 9.1%. And that's been, it can be good or bad.
Yeah. It all just depends on moderation and the next day.
Exactly.
What was the initial response, though, from the marketplace, where they know you for porters and pale ales and indescribable ale?
Yeah, I don't think we got a whole lot of, you get those rogue Facebook, Instagram posts of like, you guys don't do this type of thing. But I think we were bracing ourselves for more of that than we actually received. I think we got a lot more of, oh, this is so fun, in the artwork on the can. We worked with our graphic designer, Mark, who's been doing our, art since day one. And he actually went to his buddy from design school, and they came up with those, those cat illustrations. And I think that was part of it, is really showing we're not trying to say this is the next iteration of Switchback Ale. We're trying to say this is something we want to do as a brewery. It kind of represents a little bit of the younger, newer brewing innovations that we've been doing. And, I'm one of the old ones here now. So to have some of this kind of youthful ideas and tastes come through is fantastic.
I feel like that's a pretty good transition into how the brewery became an ESOP, employee owned. What we were saying about 5-6 years ago, and keeping it youthful, keeping it moving forward in a positive direction. When you look around and you see fellow owners and you see folks who have skin in this game, there's got to be I imagine there's a larger push to say, okay, well, how do we keep the lights on? How do we keep them shining bright? And new beers is certainly a smart way for that.
Yeah. So I think it was 2017. I should know, but Bill and Jeff, our other co-founder, made the transaction for us to be 100% employee owned, where I believe one of only a couple breweries that are fully 100% as of now. I know there's some others that are trying to get to that point, but they went all in and said, no, this is the direction we're going. We want this to be all of ours moving forward. And I really think, it was more or less overnight. The crew that was here was kind of like, oh, wait, yeah, there is going to be a future someday without Bill at the helm. And that's both frightening and exciting from we've got careers ahead of us, and it's not, Bill's always done a very good job of taking all of our input and, floating ideas by all of us. I mean, before we did the bottling line, he literally said, where do we want to go with this? And then before we went to 12 ounce, he said, what are your guys' thoughts? What do you want quality of life to be? So it's always been very inclusive, but when it's actually down to ownership, I think it really came like, oh no, we are all officially owners now. So bring the new ideas to the table. Let's run with some things. And it certainly has, the whole cat series came out of that. Some of our barrel age stuff, Alex, who does our barrel aging, there's been a lot of things that we didn't even really consider, 8 years ago, and probably not from that we weren't employee owned. It was more of just, people were just doing their job, not planning on being owners necessarily.
Yeah. What have you learned in the last 5 years since this change?
ESOPs are very convoluted financial agreements. That's the biggest takeaway for me. That's true though, right? That's yeah.
Because I know there's people who it has been seen as a way of ensuring a brewer's future. The word independence gets thrown around a lot. There's a very local sense behind a lot of breweries, and this is a way to kind of keep that going. And we've seen that some have been longstanding. We've seen others that have lasted for a few years before a larger company comes in and makes an offer and buys out all of the employee owners. But it's not just as easy as, cool, I'm an owner now. Like there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think we still don't even understand exactly how it how it works day in and day out sometimes. And I say that from, I'm not on the financial side of it for the most
Yeah.
part. So there are people who do get it. But it, it initially puts you in a pretty, you really have to, it's not just us as a privately owned company anymore that can make our own decisions based on what we think is appropriate. You actually have a trust and a bank looking over your shoulder saying, well, we don't know about that. You're like, but clearly in order to make more beer, we need this thing. And that's just for the first few years. While, some of the initial transaction items are being ironed out. But from the positive side of things, internally, I think, like I said, the crew, it gave us, it's all a new sense of respect for how daunting some of these decisions can be, but also a pride that we already have, but certainly grew when we became, we could say, yeah, no, we're owners. And then from Vermont, Vermont's very supportive of other Vermonters, and even before all of this, but especially now that it's not just one owner, it's 35 of us. I can't even remember how many of us, but you get a lot of, I love that you're employee owned. I love that you guys are still independent. So I'm going to go drink your beer for that. Plus I really like it.
I mean, that's great, because it's just another way to resonate with customers, with drinkers who walk in and day out. And I know when I put on my consumer hat, I always feel better about knowing where my dollars are going. And, I think that sort of plays into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I go out and buy a beer, I'm not thinking about that with every purchase, but it certainly does, when you're deciding between two, or, especially when you're in the brewing scene, you're kind of like, oh, I like those guys, I'm going to try that. Or
Yeah.
I'm going between these two 12 packs. Yeah, I'm going to go with this direction. And I think that plays the consumer. I actually think it plays, we're still pretty regional. We're mostly only New England and New York. And, New England's kind of funny in that way, that New Hampshire and Vermont, I think we, in some ways, not for everything, but consider ourselves like, you're like, oh, it's still regional. Like New Hampshire beer, I'll support them just as much as I support Vermont beer. And, people take pride in supporting that, and also kind of having a relationship, whether it's just having come into the tap room once or their cousin's best friend works here. Everyone's related somehow.
Yeah. So there are, I don't know, maybe 4, 5 listeners right now who have been listening to us talk, who are screaming at the radio saying, when are you going to talk about Rauchbier? So I know from hanging out with you, it is also, that style is also a passion for you. Tell me about your love of Rauchbier.
How long do we have? No, just kidding. Yeah, so I truthfully, I mean, I had Schlenkerla at some point. I don't know when, but some beer bar, probably early 2000s, and I was like, that's a smoked beer. Okay. And didn't really think about it too much after that. And then one of the cool things that we do here at Switchback is, I don't know when Bill even came up with this, but when you hit the 10-year mark as an employee, you get a free trip to Germany. And I was actually the first one to hit that mark. And so I went in 2015, I believe. And during my trip, I walked out a few days and said, I'm going to Bamberg. And which was odd because, again, I didn't really consider myself a smoked beer fan, but felt like, you're in Germany, you got to do this. And I can't paint it all, but I could paint you a picture of exactly where I was sitting for that first smoked beer. And it was just sitting on this little side, the street, and having the beer, and went, all right. I got another one. And then I was like, I was sold. And that was it. And as the trip progressed, I left and met up with my brothers. My sister-in-law actually came over, and I carried one Schlenkerla around in my bag that I was going to bring back to the brewery. And about a week later, I was like, man, I just miss a good smoked beer. So we cracked it open when we were in Austria. I didn't even bring it back. So that was kind of what kicked it off for me. And, unbeknownst to me, I guess Bill had been kind of noodling around with thinking about smoked malts and flavor profiles. And at some point when I came back, I mentioned something about smoked beers, and he sort of was like, all right, well, I've been thinking about it too. So really, I think he'd already been kind of going through the thought exercise of what smoked beer can be and how we can push that past just the traditional beers, which are what we all were introduced with and what I still love. But we've kind of got a little wild with it.
You have, and that's what I love about the Flint on Fire series, which Flint Avenue is the road that the brewery is on. Just
correct. Yep.
Yeah. But I mean, the Saison and I want to say there's an oyster stout that I had a while back, and
yep.
An IPA, and so I think porters and Hells have been the two styles that folks have really embraced over the years. But walk me through just a little bit about how you all are coming up with where you want to put smoked malt. Right? Is anything off the table at this point?
I don't think anything's off the table. I think there have been things we have thought about and gone, well, I don't know if we've quite figured out if that's the right direction we want to go right now. Not sure we're going to get a smoked lambic anytime soon, but that's probably more from a lambic perspective than the smoked malt. Yeah, I mean, I think Smoke 40, which is our smoked IPA, is one of the craziest beers I've ever had, just because it's a different smokiness. It's an IPA, but it's so pineapple fruit forward, but the smoke kind of balances into the savory side. So that's what we've really discovered, is that smoke doesn't have to be the only element. And I think traditionally it's been, this beer is smoke, it's going to slap you across the face with that. And we've certainly got those. We love those too. But, there can be a spectrum of this. So we've actually, created our own little smokeometer, which, explains how much smoke is actually in smoked malt is in the beer. And everyone's perception is different. But hopefully it introduces some people to different ways to utilize that flavor.
Yeah. I mean, when you're trying stuff, is it okay? Maybe this will see the light of day. Maybe this will see a 22, or maybe we're just going to be crying a little bit as we dump it down the drain. Or do you have now at this point when you're thinking about new beers for that series, do you have a pretty good understanding of how things are going to turn out in the end?
I think we do. I think a lot of times the level of smoke is what we end up dialing in through the pilot process. It's not as much as we were going for. It's way too subtle. We actually initially our gateway smoked beer, which is pun intended, called Gates of Hellas.
Yeah.
We actually sort of reinvented that. I mean, that still lives, but we created another one called Hellas Bent, which is a smoked Hellas that's just slightly amped up, because we decided, after a couple of years, people didn't need that gateway to be quite as low. So I think a lot of times the level of smoked malt use is what we're really dialing in. And then, specifically, I think for the IPA, finding the right hop profile too, that would complement that smoked malt.
So the IPA was a success. Have there been ones where, okay, hey, we tried that, we don't ever have to make that again?
We have not. I don't believe we've shelved a smoked beer that we put out yet. Shouldn't say yet. We never will. No, we don't put stuff out we're not going to drink. There are ones that are just actually, I'm thinking about it, and it's funny. Like my first instinct was like, oh, Blackstrap, that's the crowd pleaser. Well, we actually haven't made Blackstrap, I think, in over a year. It's about to be released, I think, this week, or we just put it out on the shelves here, and we're going to put it on tap. And we actually are struggling with. We've got so many of them that we want to rotate through that. Some of them just don't get showcased as much.
I know I have a bottle of Blackstrap here in the cellar, but I, for the life of me, can't remember what it is. It's in a swing top bottle.
Okay, so that's the barrel aged Blackstrap, which we lovingly call Babs. So that one, so our Blackstrap is sort of a takeoff on Kansas City barbecue.
Okay.
You know, Bill was the brewmaster out at Boulevard for a while, so he had this like, all right, smoky, sweet. Let's see what we can do here. And then we thought it would be fun to throw that into a barrel, so we put it into Stonecutter whiskey barrels. We've actually done a couple different iterations of it. One was more of a blend of barrels, but that one is a little more high octane. And
I guess I should be opening that
kind
soon.
of woody. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually had some the other day from our newer batch of it, and it still tastes great. It's got some nice vanilla to it, and the smoke certainly is not as upfront as it is with the, you know, the unbarrel aged, but it's still underlying there. And then you got those fun whiskey flavors.
Yeah.
It's a good winter beer.
Okay. Have you seen, I mean, we make jokes on the show about Rauchbier quite a bit because it's probably the most polarizing style. But since you've been making it, have you seen an actual like growth of consumer interest?
We have. It's, you know, it's funny when people walk into the tap room. I was noticing it this summer, and you know, people walk in, they do that glance left and right, and then they look up at the menu board, and then they kind of stand there, sort of eyes glazed over for a minute, try to sort things through, and then they go, "We're here because we heard you make smoked beers," you know, question mark / that's why we're here, we think. Right. And then they go, "Oh yeah, I want one of the Flint on Fire," or "I want a Flint on Fire." We're like, "Well, there's 5 of them on tap. Which one?" And then they're, you know, you can just see them kind of like, "Oh, all right." So, you know, word's certainly getting out. I don't know. I think it's through your podcast, honestly.
Stop.
All 12 of those listeners came in.
Wow, we've doubled the audience. Thanks so much. Just, you say it, and now suddenly we're at a dozen. Cool.
And you know, it's opening some doors for us too, just from we're hoping to be part of, I think this was via you, that the smoke beer event at the CBC, and
oh yeah,
some things like that, because, you know, it's those specialty events. I'd love to bring ale and things to those, but that's, you know, people want to try stuff that they can't get on the shelves regularly. So, and it's great for us to be able to talk about other things. You know, we did Savor we did it this past year, and then we did it pre-COVID. So whatever year that was. And that was so much fun. And we actually, you know, it's down in DC, and we have all these people coming up to us and saying, "Oh, you didn't bring Switchback ale." And we're like, "You wanted us to bring Switchback ale to Savor? Man, maybe we missed here."
But those events are made for, or should be made for, exploration and for trying. I don't actually know if the guys at Brewing and Blending have formally announced it yet. But yes,
so you can cut that out.
No, I'm going to keep it in. And Spencer Longhurst, who I think is listening, is now scrambling to get the website going. We're going to do a Camp Rauchbier event at Brewing and Blending during the Craft Brewers Conference in Nashville in May. So I forget the particular date. I think it's the Wednesday of, might be the 9th, thereabouts. But we'll have much more information on that. But it's going to be fun. And I love that, you know, brewers get jazzed about it, that there is like an actual interest. Like, it can be a goofy thing, but there's so much work that goes into making sure that the smoke is dialed in correctly, that that the malts are doing what you want them to do, and then trying new things, that it's just another avenue of exploration. Yeah,
absolutely. It's
yeah, go ahead.
We're having a great time with it, and we got more coming down the way too. So
with that in mind, with exploration in mind, where are your interests leading you these days, beer wise? What do you want to be exploring? You know, we're coming up on a new year. People talk about resolutions. They talk about, you know, trying to learn new skills or figure out new things. Is there something that is of interest to you that you want to be on the path for?
That's a good question. I have not really thought about that. From a true beer perspective, probably, yeah, I think finding or continuing to, with the smoked beers, almost, I do think they can be everyday beers. You know, maybe not all of them, but I think just continuing to work through whether it's the Hellas or other things on the kind of marketing side of like, let's get these things in a 6-packs, and they don't have to be just special occasion beers. Let's see how we feel personally, initially. Just that's the 6-pack you grab when you're going to the picnic type of thing. I would like to continue go in that direction, since I think it's been tabled for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
As people moved away from the smoke, and it's like, you know what, I think it's there. Maybe not for everyone, and I know you're laughing at this probably.
No, I'm not actually. I love hearing it, and I'm here for it. That's
and up till now, those smoked beers for us have only been in the 22-ounce bottles, and we're working towards getting them into the cans with the new labeler. And nice. I have considered them special occasion beers because they were in 22s, and I think getting them into cans will certainly, for my own perspective, kind of be like, no, just grab one of those. That's just you're out doing some yard work, or you're just watching a game, and grab it.
The first time, please, the first time that you spot Rauchbier cans on the side of the road in Vermont,
I will take a
please
picture.
Send me a note. Yeah, please, immediately.
And I promise not to plant it. I'm honest. I won't do that. It'll be a big scandal.
I've been asking folks the green door question on the show for quite some time now, with the premise being that in the early parts of the pandemic, my wife and I were rewatching the Good Place television show. And in the last season, they introduced this concept of a green door where you can walk through it and be anywhere at any point in time, doing whatever you want to be doing. And so if we had a door on our plane of existence that worked that way, and you could walk through it when this conversation was over, and you could go into any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
Wow. I should have listened to more of the most recent podcasts and been ready for this question.
That's okay. Yeah.
My mind quickly, I don't know if this would be my question in an hour or my answer in an hour, but my mind quickly went to, I don't hold me to whatever year this was, but
no, that's fine.
Germany, when they had, the women, the sisters, the mothers, they all ran the breweries. They were these beautiful, big family breweries. The house was attached to it. Bill's told me all these stories about he went to get some equipment years ago from a place, and he walked in, and like there's the 3 sisters and the mom, and the brothers and the dad were kind of shoved off to the side a little bit, and there's this beautiful ornate like entryway, and the equipment is just pristine, it's polished all the time. And I think that, can you tell I'm German? I think that attention to detail and just that idea of this is our life's work and we do it as a family, is pretty amazing. And, I don't work with family members, but I think having worked here almost 20 years, that kind of idea of like you really trust and love the people you're working with is pretty amazing. And that you hope for it to continue to go for generations. And I think that's sort of what, with the ESOP, not to bring it back to the present right away. And certainly there's some probably not great things about how things were 200 years ago, but and just the simplicity, like it's super complex operations, but again, you are not dealing with, it's gravity fed for the most part. And I'm a mechanical engineer. So the way of like, how do we physically get this thing from here to there and keeping it cool enough, and, the way they use the seasons and the mountains and all that. I love learning more and more about that.
That's awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks for sharing what's happening up in Vermont. Thanks for continuing to build the mystery around Switchback Ale, but mostly for spreading the good word of Rauchbier. So I'm excited to see it in cans. I think that'll be awesome. But thanks
thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show this week. Yeah. Hey, what's your go-to everyday beer? Let me know by emailing. It's John Holl, JOHNHOLL @allaboutbeer.com, or you can share your thoughts on Twitter while it still exists at John_Holl. All About Beer is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. You can just follow along at All About Beer. And of course, This Week in Rauchbier is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's at TW Rauchbier. We're able to bring you the show each week, thanks to companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you would like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by Pro Brewer. We bring original articles to probrewer.com twice a week, covering issues that are important to the beer industry and aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand different facets of the business. You can check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and Thursday, and you can visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. Please don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. You can search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. Don't forget, go visit allaboutbeer.com. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.